Ladies and gentlemen, it's showtime. Please get ready for Digital Fart from the Neo-Archaic Futureland, and welcome to the stage, all the way from Moscow, Russia, Oleg Denisov. Some physical comedy at the beginning. Always good to start you off. Okay, guys, good morning. Good morning, everybody, really. Terrible 11 a.m. in Edinburgh, terrible time to start the show, but still at least it provides me with a fairly original opening line. Just good morning. Not many shows start with good morning at the Fringe. Not many. Not nearly enough, I would say. By the way, are there any people that actually I gave you like a flyer between 10 and 11 a.m. in the streets? Like, I do it every day. Are there any people? No, didn't think so. Waste of time, really. People here at the Fringe, they tell me like the best time to flyer for your show is like 40-45 minutes before it actually starts. Yeah, probably. It doesn't really work at 11 a.m. What usually happens is I say, oh, would you like to go to some political comedy from Russia? And they say, no, I'd like to see some eggs on a plate right now. Thank you very much. It's the only thing I want to see at 11 a.m. in the morning. So yeah, guys. By the way, yeah, we're filming this thing, and there is a kind of a choice for the performer, kind of address this issue and play with it, or just continue business as usual, as if nothing is happening, But obviously, I just went for the third option, which is to start a pointless rhetorical discussion with myself about it. It's kind of. And guys, obviously all of you know, I've told you beforehand, and you all can see the camera, don't look, don't ruin the great illusion, please. And if you're watching this like on YouTube, on your computer or whatever, you also have, I think, strong enough reasons to believe that this is a filmed event. So, let's just get on with it. Okay, guys, so my name is Oleg, I'm from Russia. It's my first time here in Britain, or in any English-speaking country for that matter, I like it here, to be honest, I threw away my passport already. I'm another one of them, coming over here, stealing your comedy stage time. Soon it's gonna be just us here in this weird pre-noon comedy slots at the Fringe, just immigrants. In this weird morning slots, we're gonna build our ghetto, where laws don't apply and police dare not show their faces. That's what's gonna be one version of events. So you see, guys, this is a show about Russian politics, about political situation in Russia and in the world. And has anyone here been to Russia, by the way? Oh, some people there. Where have you been?
Moscow.
Moscow is good.
Leningrad.
Oh, so I take it it was quite a long time ago, because now it doesn't exist exactly.
1985.
Yeah. Okay, so. Did you enjoy your trip?
We did.
Or were you there for the wrong reasons or for the right reasons? Dare I say? Okay, so yeah, guys, but we can talk about Russia for a long time. But mainly it's a show about Russian politics. Really, it's a show about Russian politics, and just to see if we're on the same page, please, sir. Just simple question: who's the president of Russia?
Vladimir Putin.
No pause. I like it. It's usually people like make a pause of like 5 seconds and they go like. Is this a trick question then? No, it's not. You're absolutely correct. It's one of the things about living in an authoritarian state. It's never a trick question who's the president of your country. Never in your life. See? So this show is called Digital Fart from the Neo-Archaic Futureland, and it's supposed to be like a satirical show about information politics, about how authoritarian state and the government and the media sort of divide different groups of people and different nations. Well, I'm sure you can see it all, I think I made a pretty self-explanatory title, to be honest. But that's what I think it's about, because I did a preview of this show in Manchester to 15 drunk people in the back room of the pub. And the next day, I was leaving Manchester, and a guy who was never in the audience, had never seen him before, comes up to me and, says, can I buy you a drink? And I say, why? And he says, well, aren't you that Russian guy who does like a stand-up show about racism and nostalgia? I guess it means they like it there. So maybe that's what it's about. I have no idea, really. So yeah, but still I must do some kind of a preface, some introduction, because I'm not that familiar with British audiences yet. I'm not sure what your expectations of me might be. Like in the show description, I wrote Russian alternative comedian. Yeah, well, obviously, because there are so many like mainstream Russian comics around, you know, just playing the stadiums, you know, it's all the same, you're all tired of them, all this bear stuff, how much of it can I actually take? Oh, look, we're saved. That's what the Fringe is for. Yeah. But still, Russian alternative comedian, what must be running through your head? I have no idea. Like, oh, it's gonna be a 50-minute story about how he spilled some soup in a church. Something like that, probably. Some people start nodding at this point, if you can believe it, really. I mean, don't get me wrong, I have this kind of story, you know. No, who doesn't, you know? I'm not gonna tell it, you know. It's not for public consumption, you know. Unlike the soup in it. But you see, there are some Russian stereotypes. I know them, I'm fine with them. Sometimes they make it a little bit hard to do comedy, admittedly. Like, for example, during one international comedy event, another comedian found out that I was Russian, and he announced me to the stage as a Russian man looking, I believe he used the adjective homicidal. And it's not a good look for a stand-up comedian, is it? You're not going to laugh into the face of a man who's about to murder you, you know, basically because you're not living in the 1990s action film. You know, the thing is, I can't really give you much in terms of Russian stereotypes, though. I wish I could, but I can't, you know. I don't own a weapon. I don't drink vodka, you know. In fact, I quit drinking vodka when I was around 16. As in before reaching legal drinking age, you know. I'll touch on that later, I promise. You know, we're not done with that. And also, I don't even particularly like bears, if you can believe it, you know. Even bears. You know. I meet a bear, I cross to the other side of the street immediately. You know, don't like them, you know, not much. I'm a bad Russian, ironically. So you see, what I will try to do in this show, I will not try to fulfill anybody's expectations. I will do this show strictly from my point of view as a Russian. Talk only about real facts, only about real political facts. Try to give you some distinctly authentic Russian experience. You know, maybe, you know, at the very least it will be informative. Maybe it will help us find some cultural common ground towards the end and bring our worlds a little bit closer together. Is this a good objective? Yeah. Well, you know, let's set realistic goals before lunch anyway. By the way, the fact that you're all feeling sort of uncomfortable in this unnecessarily big room, you know, it's no accident, you know, it's all part of your distinctly authentic Russian experience, okay? This is Russia, okay? It's ridiculously large space with very few people all huddled together in one little bit here, you know, all listening to one man, you know, with admittedly receding hairline, explaining to you in detail why your feeling of general discomfort is entirely normal and justified. You know, this is the best explanation of life in modern Russia you're ever going to hear. You know, I just hope there's not going to be more people coming in the final days of the festival, you know, because it will ruin the metaphor, frankly. You know, and if there's one thing you need to know about me as a writer-performer, is that I will always prefer a precise metaphor to genuine success. That's true, guys. That is true. But you see, the point is, though, if it all seems a little bit too foreign for you at some point, maybe too dark, or you find it boring or annoying, you know, you can go, it's all right. I'm not going to call it out like, oh, I see. For some people, the Cold War clearly hasn't ended. Yeah, I'm not going to do that, you know. But conversely, I'd like to ask you, please don't use your phones and please don't heckle, you know. Partly because I admittedly come from what you might call an alternative tradition of public speaking, best illustrated by the recent words of the Speaker of the Russian Parliament, who actually said, "The Parliament is not a proper place for discussion." Quoting, yes, and, you know, clumsy segue into political material, but we had to do it at some point, to be honest. But, you know, but mainly not because of that, mainly because there's really lots of material ahead and we may not have time for this sort of thing. Now, I understand that it's not ideal with this cross-cultural communication premise that now I'm saying, oh, I'm not going to talk to you much. But what I will do for that purpose is, during the month at the Edinburgh Fringe, I've been registering all the audience's responses to different jokes, and after the festival, I'll pass all the data on to the supervising organization. Okay? And I don't mean the Edinburgh Fringe Society, right? I mean the KGB, okay? These two organizations are fundamentally different, you know, even if it's not apparent at first sight. All the Fringe performers laughed at this point. So, yeah. So you see, guys, it all starts with a dedication. Now we see a picture of a man here. You probably don't know him, do you? No, he's a Russian man. His name is Joseph Kobzon, and to you he might look a little bit like what Dr. Frankenstein was going for originally. Yeah, but really, he's a great man. He's a musician, a singer, people's artist of USSR, of Russia. He's known and loved by literally several generations of Russian people, you know, and my personal hero as well. You know, in a way, he unites all of us. To put it this way, if you're a Russian, you can hear his rich, velvety baritone on the day you're born, your wedding day, and at your funeral. Right? If there's been a mix-up and you're alive, obviously. But Joseph Kobzon, he's around 80 years old now. He's been having health problems recently. He's got cancer, basically, but he's not very serious, and he's getting good treatment abroad, so he'll probably be fine, you know. But still, I'd like to dedicate this show to this great man, Joseph Kobzon. I hope he gets well soon. Could we have a round of applause for Joseph Kobzon here? Thank you very much. Thank you. Now, you see, I'm a sort of a resident political comedian of Moscow. And as you can probably guess from that information, I'm never going to be on TV. Never. But people ask me here, like, isn't it dangerous doing political comedy in Russia? Can't you go to prison for that? To which I always say, absolutely. You can, you know. In Russia, you can go to prison for all sorts of weird things. For example, earlier this year, a guy was arrested and criminally prosecuted for catching Pokemons in a church. Okay, but although in this case, I must admit there's some logic behind the prosecution. Because of all places, a church is obviously not an appropriate place for an intense and self-forgetful search for some entity that doesn't really exist, is it? Can you handle irony before lunch? Yeah. You can, obviously, yes. We're going to be fine. So, but maybe you heard another case of this sort, like, have you heard about Pussy Riot, right? Pussy Riot. Yeah? 4 girls in colorful balaclavas did an anti-Putin sing and dance inside the main cathedral of Moscow, went to prison for 2 years, got out, became celebs, got on stage with Madonna, as if the prison wasn't punishment enough. Yeah. But many people don't know anything else about Pussy Riot and just sort of assume that they were some kind of anarcho-feminist punk band, just based on the name Pussy Riot, right? It's not actually true, you know. They were a politically inclined punk band, yes, but Pussy Riot's exclusive political goal was in fact to put a swift and violent end to the domestication of cats. Through initiating a massive grassroots civil disorder of the cats worldwide. And prior to the church thing, Pussy Riot's 3 main hits had actually been I'll scratch my own back, shove your cat comb in your ass. I spit your whiskers in your face, you chauvinistic cat slaver. And a purr to freedom. Yeah. That's just a bit of fun there, basically. You know, just cat owners like this joke. I do it all for them. So you see, but there are, you know, joking aside, there are real dangers. There are real dangers. I'm aware of them every day, because politically speaking, I am a liberal. And in Russia, many people, like, irrationally hate liberals. To them, a liberal is something of a swear word. The only thing that's arguably worse than being a liberal is being a pedophile. You know. But, of course, there is one thing that's, you know, even more threatening to these people than being a liberal or a pedophile. And this is, of course, a liberal pedophile. And it is threatening to these irrational, liberal-hating people for one reason, because to these people, a liberal pedophile means someone who's uncontrollably sexually aroused by children, but whose definition of a child is dangerously vague, and therefore might include a person of any age with underdeveloped intellectual abilities. Very different responses throughout this whole run to this thing. Sometimes everybody laughs, usually a mixed response. Sometimes it's just dead silence. You know. Basically, I figured there are 4 different types of responses to this joke, and I will go through each of them now. So you see, the first one is you understand the joke, you find it funny, you laugh, I like you. That's the basic one. Second, you understand the joke, you don't laugh, you don't find it funny, that's fair enough. The third type of response, as I learned in my preview in London, is you don't understand the joke, you think it's about pedophiles, you find it offensive, you don't laugh, you come up to me after the show to tell me it's offensive, and please don't tell this kind of jokes in our lovely city of London. If this is your case, you know, email me, I'll send you a transcript, okay? And finally, as I found out in my preview in Manchester, there's a fourth type of response. Is you don't understand the joke, you think it's about pedophiles, you find it offensive, and you laugh. In this case, you're a monster, don't come again. Or to put it all shorter, it's kind of a shit joke, but the comedian likes it, so that's what you get. So you see, in Russia, we're not really fond of liberalism, among some other supposedly Western values, right? As I've said, I've never been to Britain before, nor have I been to Australia, Canada, or any of Britain's other franchises, right? And in Russia, you know, if you go abroad in Russia, you don't just sort of go as yourself, you sort of represent your country and your leader. So especially for people like me, Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs issued sort of an instruction of how to modify your behavior abroad. Because if you go abroad, you do something bad there, you offend someone, they're going to think bad things about Putin. And we can't let that happen. Let's be fair, he's done literally nothing to deserve that. And this instruction is actually great. It helps you understand how Russia sees the West nowadays. For example, for Canada, it says, where same-sex marriage is legalized and a strong fixation on gender equality can be observed, is not the best place for sleazy jokes about non-traditionals, especially in Montreal, Toronto, and Vancouver, large megapolises with dense concentration of buffs. Quoting, you know. And for France, it advises to avoid such behavior towards women, which can be interpreted as an expression of sexism, and not try to explain to local people what is, in inverted commas, the proper place of a woman in society. Wait. A proper place of a woman in society isn't in inverted commas. But the word sexism is, you know. You know, to be honest, I expected sort of similar set of rules for Britain as well. But turns out, according to Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs instruction, the most important thing about Britain is basically, don't you mix up this and this. And you'll be fine. You just go around being homophobic and sexist and whatever. It's just as long as you're able to maintain some finger-based common courtesy, basically. How hard can that be anyway? You know, peace to you, by the way. But you see, there is a valid point in all this, I think. Like, consider tourism, for example. I've been to some southern European countries, such as Turkey and Spain, some exotic countries, like in Japan. And in all of these countries, Russian and British tourists are not particularly liked, you know, because of their previous experiences. So, in a way, we do represent our people and affect how our compatriots are treated in other countries. So maybe this instruction, with inappropriate words and gestures, could be a reasonable thing. But it isn't. For one reason. Because it seems to concentrate only on the offenses you can possibly cause to local people without your intention to do so. And therefore it's clearly based on not inclusive enough notion of what, for a Russian or a British tourist, might constitute a fun summer holiday pastime. Because I'm not sure how much offense I can actually cause in Turkey or in Spain or in Japan with a bad choice of words, inappropriate gesture, inappropriately inclined bow, I don't know. If a couple of meters from me, my compatriot, drunk, with a bottle of beer and in a football shirt, nothing else, sitting on the curb, openly defecating onto a Muslim prayer mat, I don't know, or a plate of tapas, or a bonsai, I don't know, whilst loudly drawing some elaborate parallels between what he's doing and the particulars of military action in a war between the two countries, which happened several hundred years ago. Or the match events of a fairly recent game of international football, you know. My point is, his whole demeanor betraying a clear sense of purpose behind it, you know. And possibly some premeditation, after all. Why would he bring his own bonsai to Spain? But you see, this idea of representation can actually have a much more sinister side, to be honest. Like, in Russia today, most of the media is controlled by either the state or Putin's oligarch friends. And the general line there is, we're all surrounded by enemies, we should all support the state. Your personal well-being doesn't really matter, as long as we're sticking it to the West. Just sticking it to the West, just like this, as hard as you... But this is perfect thing for that. You're the West, sticking it to the West, like this. Like, you see the level of argument there. What's interesting is that every time I do this, the parts of the West directly affected by the sticking seem to be enjoying it the most. That's how foreign policy looks like, in Putin's wet dreams, I guess. Also, this is the only bit of conventional political comedy material which you will ever get today, okay? And I only thought of it right now, okay? So sorry about that. Could be more. But on a serious note, the worst example of that, sticking to the West, the worst example of that mentality happened a few years ago when, as a move in some political tug of war, Russian parliament and President Putin banned all the Russian orphans from being adopted by American citizens. Have you heard about this story? Yeah, some of you have. Which affected lots of children, and including the ones that had already met their new families and had all the documents signed. And it caused protest and outrage, of course. And for me, it was like a personal issue, because at the time I was working at a special school for children with behavioral problems. Many kids there had been adopted. And so I had a first-hand knowledge of what terrible learning and psychological difficulties can be caused by even a few years in a Russian orphanage. But when this happened, right, people started writing petitions to Russian children's ombudsman, right? We have one, okay? Mr. Astahov, he's ex-KGB, but we have one. Maybe he could help. He's a children's ombudsman. He's supposed to protect the rights of children. But his answer to these petitions was actually this. He said, all the countries in the world are divided in two groups, donors that give their children away and the ones that accept them. So you wouldn't want us to be treated socially and politically as a second-rate country, would you? Now you might think that as a children's ombudsman, this is clearly a man who doesn't know how to do his job. You might imagine he's a kind of a children's ombudsman who, after a group of children, for example, suffered a rafting accident with several dead, would hop on a plane, rush straight into the hospital to meet the survivors, and greet them with the phrase, "Have you had a good swim?" Which also happened, yes. But I don't think he's bad at his job. He doesn't think that anyway, because he just sees it differently, like you're all here to represent the state, and therefore to stick it to the West. Shall I? Or you remember? I can see by your face, you remember. Yes. So yes, sticking it to the West. And Mr. Astahov, the children's ombudsman, he's very successful in sticking things to the West. In fact, he stuck his own wife and children as far to the West as a villa in Côte d'Azur where they live. A very consistent man, I would say. A very consistent man. But obviously, some people don't really agree with this, seeing state as the utmost subject, So there's this deep division in our society, a political division, but not a political division in your usual sense of being right-wing or left-wing. Right-wing, left-wing doesn't work in Russia at all, and to prove it. When Donald Trump became the president of the United States, do you remember that? Yeah, well, some people just block it. They go, nope, it's still reality TV. 4 more seasons to go. No, he did. It was seen as a good thing for Putin and for the state in Russia for some reason. And on Russian TV, we even had this all-night marathon, sort of rooting for Trump until the morning. I didn't watch it until the morning. I watched it for 2 hours. I realized it wasn't Eurovision, and I went to sleep. But when this happened, when he actually won, the Communist Party of Russia, still the second most popular political party, which supports Putin as well, issued a congratulatory statement for Donald Trump, Communist Party of Russia, a statement entitled, "Donald Trump's victory is indeed the defeat of the world's financial and speculative capital." Oh, right, I remember now, I do. Right, of course. Karl Marx, Friedrich Engels, Vladimir Lenin, and Donald Trump, the 4 great communist leaders, the 4 pillars of Communist International. I've needed the 4th pillar to finally get steady, and now it's here, Donald Trump. But actually, I do believe that Donald Trump could become a good leader for the world communism, Just bear with me on this one, okay? Because on some level, Donald Trump clearly rejects the idea of personal ownership, which is a staple of communist ideology. Well, I say on some level, mainly in one area. Donald Trump is definitely very uneasy about the idea of women's ownership of their own sexual organs. Maybe later he'll be able to extrapolate into it a wider communist ideals, I don't know, just from that little acorn. You never know, really. Don't give up on the guy, that's my point. So you see, you might ask though, how does this division actually work if it concerns like your closest people in the world, like your family? Well, as you might imagine, it makes it much, much worse. Like my father, he hates me, he properly hates me, thinks I'm very unpatriotic. Now my father, I wouldn't call him right-wing, because we've already established it's not really a valid judgment, right? Well, he's right-wing by your standards, right? But in Russia, you know, he hates the West, he supports Putin, but he's not really that keen on having him crowned as a monarch just yet. So I guess in Russia he should be considered like, I don't know, borderline Voltairean. It would be more, you know, in what comedy shows do you have the word Voltairean as a punchline? just me and Michael McIntyre, basically, you know, and I'm not even sure who he is. I've just been told stuff about him. That's value for money, it's a free show anyway. So, come on. I mean, yeah, anyway, my father, he really, really hates me. I'm very unpatriotic, always angry, always shouting at me like, oh, you're so unpatriotic, oh, you're so unpatriotic. So unpatriotic. You go to these opposition rallies. You protest against the state. Our grandfathers died for you in the fields of the World War II, for you and for the state, and they were patriots, and you're not. You protest against corruption, for better economy, all these Western ideas of consumerist society. There's not enough resources in the world, you know. No. Soon we'll run out. And there's gonna be another world war. A resource war. Between all the nuclear superpowers. And we're all gonna die. Well, at least we'll take America with us. He gets excited quickly and fast forward straight to the end, basically. Watching videos with him when I was a child was frankly a nightmare. And anyway, I don't even think I am that unpatriotic, to be honest, because I wouldn't mind another world war, you know. It's precisely because I am a Russian patriot. So if I'm proud of the fact that my grandfathers died in the fields of the World War II for me to have the opportunity to lead a peaceful life and enjoy all of its benefits, so I don't see why shouldn't I be proud of the fact that my grandchildren will die in the fields of the World War III for me having used this opportunity to the maximum. You know. That's my point, I stand by it, you know.
The thing is, I like this simplistic, simplified images of patriotism more. Like, for example, you know this patriotic T-shirt with like President Putin like topless on a bear, with the gun, with the rocket, with the tank, with the dildo, with the. Come on, not with the dildo. Okay, there should have been a punchline here, so I put it there, and you laughed, so we're all fine. There wasn't a dildo. But you remember, one time, you know, sometimes these t-shirts, they send out really confusing message though. For example, I saw a guy in a black t-shirt with graphic image of President Vladimir Putin, and underneath it, it said in English, "Go hard like Putin." Now I know it's English language and meanings can differ, you know? But what can be more patriotic than a t-shirt with a recommendation to bring your penis into the state of erection in a fashion similar to that of Vladimir Putin? Now, not that there is anything inherently weird about that, you know, modeling some of your physical skills after a celebrity. Like, for example, I want to play football like Ronaldo, I want to go hard like Putin, it's fun. But what confused me in this t-shirt is that the guy wearing this t-shirt was about 20 years old, quite young. And I didn't understand why would he need a t-shirt advising him to somehow adopt a libido of a 65-year-old man. Now that was confusing, but that was not the most confusing t-shirt, because next day I saw another t-shirt, and it was even more confusing. It was a t-shirt with a picture of a traditional Russian bear here, having anal sex from behind with a bald eagle the national symbol of the United States of America. Now, not that there's anything inherently weird about that, right? Yeah? No? I mean, why should we care what the law-abiding members of the animal kingdom do? In their own spare time, out of their own free will? Who do they have sex with? As long as it's consensual, of course. And of course, as long as they do it all behind the large trees in the deep of the forest where we can't see them. But the confusing thing about this t-shirt was that the bald eagle, the symbol of the United States, was also additionally shaved bald for some reason. Why? Now, in my opinion, that has been done to imply that all the situation was taking place either in prison or in the army. Because under any other circumstance, a traditional Russian bear's involvement into an interspecies homosexual activity, even in the position of a giver, would not be ennobling enough to pay 899 rubles for the t-shirt.
So you see, the most depressing thing, though, about this simplified, simplistic images is that they actually work, you know, they do, because they get imprinted in people's minds, people's memories, people start simplifying things about politics, about everything. And I think the reason for that is because, you know, most of the young generation, my generation, even my father's generation, we're all basically idiots. And that's what I think, for what it's worth, you know. Not because we're stupid, obviously, but because it's all down to the way we get information about the world. We get it from internet, from television. Either way, it lacks any real depth and we're emotionally detached from it, you know. That's why these images work. And I'm the biggest idiot of all anyway, you know, because I mainly use internet. And how does internet work? You want to find something out, you go on a page, read half of it, get distracted, click on a link, go to the next page, read it, click on an advert. Basically, you end up masturbating, right? I mean, not literally, come on. Who on earth would do that? Metaphor, I mean, you search for information in a masturbatory, pointless sort of way. That's what I meant. What kind of an audience? Never happened before, and today as we're filming it. So you see, yeah, for that reason I really admire the older generation of men, you know, like my grandfather, because when they say something with certainty, you know it's hard tested, you know, based on real experience. Now, my grandfather, he's a peculiar mixture of like astuteness, worldly wisdom, sense of humor, racism, homophobia, and anti-Semitism. He's no sexist, though. He doesn't like women to be overly submissive. And I know this because of the internet, by the way. Because every time I visit him, he's got his old computer open, and there are all of these dirty banners that pop up without your will or permission. Now, in my view, that suggests that he likes even his porn to act with some degree of independence. That's my favorite joke of the show. Not gonna get better, you know, go now. But, you know, about this generation of men, how they get information about the world. When I was about 16, it so happened that I started shaving my face, right? It happens, yeah. And when my grandfather found out, he came up to me, he put his arm around my shoulder like this, and in a confident, mentoring voice, without the shadow of a doubt, he said to me, "If you have irritated skin after shaving, absolutely the best thing you can apply to your irritated skin after shaving is the aftershave lotion. I've been using it for 20 years, and I can confirm that it's absolutely the best thing you can use to apply to your irritated skin after shaving, the aftershave lotion." Now, at the time, my grandfather was about 60 years old. And for the last 20 years, he'd been using the aftershave lotion, because he knew for sure that it's absolutely 100% the best thing you can apply to your irritated skin after shaving, based on real experience, presumably. So there must have been a period of about 25 years since he started shaving himself, until he started using the aftershave lotion, during which he tried out all the possible substances you can apply to your irritated skin after shaving, to finally arrive at the conclusion that the aftershave lotion is absolutely the best thing, because for that generation of men, the knowledge is hard-earned, remember, based on real experience. So could this have been that
Unbeknownst to me, for over 20 years, my grandfather was leading a life of some kind of a scrupulously mad experimentalist. Trying out all the possible substances, I don't know, liquid, solid, gelatinous, powdery. Well, powder is just a solid that's been crushed, isn't it? It's not a thing. Right? It's just a plasmatic, or I don't know, maybe having states of aggregation that can only remain stable for a very short period of time, or are yet undiscovered by modern science. All the possible substances you can theoretically apply to your irritated skin after shaving. And I think he was, actually. Because otherwise, why would he take me aside and in a confident, mentoring voice, without the shadow of a doubt, say to me that absolutely the best thing, 100%, is the aftershave lotion? Now, if there were any scientists or philosophers in the room, which there never are, could they have thought of a better example of how our perceived validity of knowledge is entirely dependent on the conditions of its acquisition? I'll level with you here. It's all right. I lose everybody every time at this point. I do. It's absolutely normal and nothing funny here, really. You can probably sense that it's sort of a punchline to all this bit by the rhythm, yeah? It is. It's a silent punchline, okay? Because, not my invention, been around for some time, admittedly. But, I leave it in for two reasons. One, it's kind of important to the line of thought, and two, there was one time when it really, really worked. And it worked only once when I did this bit in Russian at a gala in Russian Academy of Sciences. And it killed there, I'm telling you, it killed there, I had 80-year-old male philosophy professors flashing their breasts at me, okay? I still do it every time ever since, just in vain hope that it might get a great reaction one day that will override that harrowing memory. But, never happened. Might just as well keep trying, I think. But there is a valid point in all this, I think, and it's that we must have some sort of a personal aspect for any knowledge or conviction to be really sort of able to stand by it. Like, for example, people in authoritarian state, they support the state, but they have to personalize with a leader to do that, right? That's what authoritarianism is all about, isn't it? It is, listen to me. I've had way more fun with it than you'll hopefully ever have, okay? It is. For example, when Joseph Kobzon, when he needed help with getting medical treatment abroad, he asked Vladimir Putin to help him personally, and he did help, right? So, but the thing is about the system is that the leader must have some sort of a strong personal image to help people personalize and identify with him. And let me ask you this. What is, from your perspective, what is Vladimir Putin's image? What's his strong public image? Who can tell me? Anyone? Not gonna go well with the filming thing.
Strongman.
Strongman, yeah, great. Thank you very much. You saved me. You saved my sorry ass, really. Strongman, yes. So usually that's the most popular answer. Strongman or macho. One day, a couple of days ago, a guy just said, gay icon. out of the blue, gay icon. I also understand, And the next day it was a very weird gig and the guy said, knobhead. Which I can also understand, but it was a very weird gig, obviously, because, this guy, he said the word knobhead about 6 times throughout the whole show, 4 times about Putin, 2 times about me. But yeah, the general answer, usual answer, macho, strongman, this sort of thing. But I don't think they describe him perfectly, because he is a strongman man, he tries to project that image. But he's kind of he's a ex-KGB, right? He's sort of a secret agent kind of macho. He doesn't like direct violence, he's kind of has this mind games, plans, sneaky, doesn't like direct violence, this sort of thing. So his main image is sort of a secret agent, right? But the thing about the problem with him being a secret agent is that there's no a personal story about his younger years, his KGB years to help people identify with him, right? Because very little information is available about that time, obviously. But they tried to correct this, right? In 2010, a story came out in Russia that when Vladimir Putin was serving in KGB in Dresden, East Germany, but then the Berlin Wall was destroyed because the Germans didn't really want to be in a socialist regime, because they didn't like pretending to work, Right. Okay, guys, if you don't find that amusing, you obviously have no idea how socialism works.
You know, because you think it's what they have in Scandinavia. It's not, okay? Socialism works this way, you know. You pretend to work, and then you pretend to get paid, and you go home. That's it. That's the only way it ever worked. Just, you know, inform and entertain. So yeah, the Berlin Wall was destroyed, right? And shortly after that, a mob burst into the KGB premises in Dresden, right? Demanding all the intelligence information about the German people. And as they were ready to burst through the door, it opened and a young KGB officer came out, and he had a gun in his hand. He went down the steps, and he addressed the crowd in perfect German. Is there any other kind? He said to them, "Go away. I am an officer, and I will have to shoot. I have 12 bullets in my gun, and even if I have to leave one for myself, there's still 11. Go away." He turned around, he started up the steps, and the crowd started to disassemble. Now, obviously, this officer was Vladimir Putin. And it does sound like a believable story, doesn't it? You know, in fact, it is a believable story in the sense that it's not based on any factual evidence whatsoever. You know, but that's what makes it believable. Otherwise, it would be just true, wouldn't it? But maybe you can sense that there is still a problem with this story. Putin comes across as sort of too directly violent, you know, just waving a gun at unarmed citizens of a then allied state, you know, a bit uncool, I would say. I would never do that. I would never come out, obviously. But, you know, but they saw this problem and they tried to correct this. In 2011, another edition of this story came out. Same premise, mob at the door, Putin comes out, unarmed, you see, brave. He goes down the steps, he addresses the crowd in perfect German, is there any other kind? He says, "Go away. Because if you go inside, there are many of my KGB colleagues in there, and they all have guns." It kind of makes it worse, if anything, if you ask me, really, you know. So there's still like no plausible story about Vladimir Putin, the secret agent, you know. And I decided to investigate this, right? What he really did in Dresden. I went through all the reliable sources, and literally everything I could find out was that Putin did in Dresden. He lived there with his wife. They were very happy about the German car they bought. And that Putin, during that time, developed a particular fondness for German beer and ping pong. And there's nothing else apart from that. Nothing, you know. But that's definitely true, because there's even like a genuine photo of Putin with another KGB officer are topless in a yard playing ping pong with quite large beer bellies. I mean, they have beer bellies. It's not the case of like the weirdest game of doubles in history, obviously. You know. So my point is, I'm informed about this now, and so are you. So don't you ever believe a heroic story about Vladimir Putin, the secret agent, unless it heavily involves a ping pong table, some whizzing paddles, and a shitload of premium lager. But I know that, that's water, by the way. I know that you wouldn't believe it anyway, though, right? Because it's sort of a lazy, archetypal, authoritarian leader sort of story. Not enough detail. You would never get into your media. Anyway, I genuinely love and envy your Western media. I love your free Western media. I genuinely love and envy and adore your free Western media. I can't stress this enough, really. I'm trying as hard as I can right now. I love your Western media. So comprehensive, I would say. Like, for example, just when Donald Trump became the president of the United States, again, right? I mean, not again. You know, don't get alarmed, you know. Just, not yet, you know, America, who knows, you know. The Americans are laughing right now. Much closer to the situation. They know it's actually not a joke, so there's kind of a defensive laugh from Americans. But yeah, so when this happened, right, a story came out in many of your media, in your social media, supposedly leaked from the Russian intelligence, right? And in 2013, Donald Trump was staying in a Moscow hotel shortly after President Obama had stayed there with his wife. And that Donald Trump, he hired some prostitutes to perform golden showers on each other. We all know what golden showers are. I'm tempted to take the silence as a no. And you wouldn't like that. You know, because yesterday, genuinely, there was one girl who didn't know that. You know, so, you know, and a couple of days before, one lady just went, oh, you just went when I said, well, you know what the golden showers are? And she went like, oh, yes. How can I forget this? Yeah, so yeah, we all know. Okay, I'll just assume, right? So when Donald Trump hired some prostitutes to perform golden showers on each other on the very bed on which Barack and Michelle Obama had slept, therefore sort of defiling this bed, you know, because he hated Obama so much. Well, again, on some level, I think he can only be admired for that, really. Because it's not often in our prosaic times you see a politician with such firm belief in the power of the symbolic gesture. And the stronger the faith, the further you're willing to go to test it. But it must have been a symbolic act anyway, because he couldn't have thought he could actually hurt Obama in some way by this, because he stayed there before. And Donald Trump, I think, surely possesses like the basic notion of linear progression of time from the past into the future. Doubt. Yeah, I agree, an arguable point considering some of his statements and policies, but I think he does, on some basic level though, right? You know, call me conservative. So yeah, and anyway, that's what was treated in your media, in your social media, as a symbolic act, you know, regardless of it actually happening. But all the details, all the implications were there. Like, for example, how much influence does Russia now have over US politics, if they filmed it? And they always do, you know, they're a country with great traditions in cinema. Right? It's a very interesting question, much more interesting than whether or not the story's true. And it's probably true anyway, because it's sort of thing that he could have done, right? And also, what did Donald Trump try to enact with prostitutes pissing on each other on Obama's bed? Now, we know that Donald Trump was and is very strongly against Obamacare, which is a medical insurance program. Could this have been a statement criticizing only partial inclusion of the urine incontinence into the insurance policy? It's a very interesting question, much more interesting than whether or not it's true. And also, did Donald Trump put up a spike with a severed pig's head on it near the bed, sort of overlooking the action, to symbolically establish British Prime Minister's proximity to American politics? Yet to definitely indicate his second-string spectator role in the process. It's a very interesting question, much more interesting than whether or not it's true. And it's probably true anyway, because we have a videotape of a man talking about the incident, so it must be true. And it's also the sort of thing that he definitely could have done, so it's kind of exactly the same as if he's done it. That's why I love your Western media and envy your free Western media, because if you stand against someone's policies, you can just play around with a vivid image of them being a pervert or having sex with a pig. And, you know, it really helps fuel the passion, I think. It does. That's why I envy your free Western media, because we don't have it in Russia, you know. We have to either say nice things about them, or we have to stick to the irrefutable facts of wrongdoing and corruption. Or ideally both at the same time. Doubtful love. How does it work, you may ask? I'll show you. Now, one of the main proponents of the law banning Russian orphans from being adopted by American citizens was Joseph Kobzon here. He's been a Russian MP for the last 20 years in the ruling United Russia Party. He's still an active singer, of course, a legend, people's artist of Russia, and he still says that all the ranks and titles are good, but for me the most important thing is the joy and love of my wide, loving and grateful audience on which I can bestow my music and my art. And when Joseph Kobzon, when he fell ill with cancer, he asked Vladimir Putin to help him with medical treatment abroad, because he'd been banned from all the Western countries for supporting the war in Ukraine. And many people in Russia saw it as ironic, remembering his involvement in the anti-orphan law. But I refuse to see it as ironic, because I'm sure that when forcing Russian orphans to stay in the country, Joseph Kobzon, this great man, was pursuing only one great and noble goal, which is to expand his loving and grateful audience so that we should be able to bestow his music and his art. But there are things that he hadn't foreseen, Joseph Kobzon, this great man. He's a great man, but he's no god. One of the things that there's among the Russian orphans being adopted by Americans compared to the ones adopted by Russians, there is a 10 times higher percentage of children with disabilities, including the deaf-mute. And if you think about it, that to a certain degree ruins Joseph Kobzon's noble goal of expanding his loving and grateful audience. And another thing that he hadn't foreseen, Joseph Kobzon, this great man, is that by now, many of the orphans who are supposed to be adopted have already died because of the inadequate medical services in the orphanages. And I think it further wrecks Joseph Kobzon's noble goal of expanding his loving and grateful audience. And I'm sure it saddens this great man. And I hope he gets well soon. You can probably sense right now we have this very divided society. You know, divided politically, in terms of values, between generations, cut off from the West in many ways. But there was a time, it was a time where it wasn't like that, And it actually was when I was growing up in Russia in the 90s, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, when we had nothing, lost all the money. But we acquired one thing, and it was a common cultural platform, and it was a Western one too, and it actually was shitty American action films and television series. We had them all day long on our television because we didn't have any of our own and nobody wanted to watch Soviet programs, obviously. And I would watch them together, with my father, with my grandfather, with my friends. And our favorite one was actually Chuck Norris, Walker, Texas Ranger. Do you remember that? Yeah, if you don't, just imagine Chuck Norris in a hat, okay? Because it was, it was about good beating evil, quite literally beating up evil, And if you remember, Chuck Norris, he ended every conversation there, every fight, every conversation he ended in a fight. And every fight he ended with a sort of a roundhouse kick. Do you remember from action movies, the roundhouse kick? Something like this, arguably more graceful than that. Definitely more effective. I used to try harder, believe me, but during my second preview I did it and I pulled a muscle I didn't even know I had. He made it look so easy, basically. So yeah, it doesn't matter how many, every fight, doesn't matter how many punches were exchanged before that. The roundhouse kick, it was like the end of the fight, always. It meant that the good and order have finally prevailed. And because our parents were sort of always too busy trying to scrape a living and stuff, we, the kids, we took all of our basic moral notions about the world from shitty American television. And to us, the Chuck Norris's roundhouse kick, it became like a universal positive gesture of good prevailing over evil. We would do this gesture like symbolizing the roundhouse kick this way. We were kids, not this way, never this way, always this way, just symbolizing the Chuck Norris's roundhouse kick. We would use this gesture like in all the possible positive situations, I don't think of one, myriads of situations, right? We were kids, like this, Like, for example, if we needed to wave at someone, we needed to, wash an American tourist's car for the equivalent of 15 cents, we would use it. Or if we finished doing something, and we felt like we've done it as well as we could. We did this gesture to sort of finalize it, like Chuck Norris finalizing the fight. The universal positive gesture, good prevailing over evil, I think it's safe to say that in Russia in the 90s, the whole country was moving together in the direction of Chuck Norris's roundhouse kick. But it's not only this, of course. We took all of our basic notions about the world from shitty American television. Like, for example, my first strong sexual image was from Xena the Warrior Princess. Do you remember that? Of course you do. It's not going to be the obvious one, though, no. Because in the second episode of the show, Xena, she's wounded, she's got a sword in her side here, and she's lying on a bed, and she pulls it out like this, like... And to me, it was the first plausible image of a female orgasm. The real one. I knew the fake one from When Harry Met Sally, obviously, you know. I knew it was fake, because, well, she said, okay? But with Zina, I knew it was real, because it had an element of relief after a period of harrowing misery. So it exactly mirrored an average sexual experience of a woman in a country with centuries-long history of repressing female sexuality. But you know, I guess it all shaped me in Russia in the 90s. It did. It just shaped me as a person in Russia in the 90s. It did. You know, I remember when I was in the kitchen one time when I was a very small child. I was in the kitchen, and my father, he was making yogurt for me. By which I mean he was stirring something like cement in a glass of milk. You know, we didn't have much in Russia in the 90s. You know, some people didn't laugh. You know, third world problems. And he was talking to me. He said, "Oleg, little Oleg, when I was your age, I wanted to become an astronaut when I grow up, as we all did in Soviet times. What do you want to be when you grow up?" And I said, "Well, Daddy, when I grow up, I'd like to become a monkey with a karate black belt called Jean-Claude." Don't look at me weird, okay? I was a child. Oh, obviously I've given up. I've almost given up on this now. I'm an adult, you know? And if you didn't know, that's how you become an adult, when your boldest dreams are shattered against the glass ceiling of your actual ability. We didn't have much in Russia in the 90s. I mean, trying to explain how little we actually had. Very little. We're almost out of time, really. And, you know, just one example. Vodka, right? Do you remember vodka? Do you remember vodka? It's a nice question. We had lots of this very cheap, very bad vodka, you know. And when I was 11 or 12, we would drink it. It was common in our children's parties, really. You know, that's true, because it was before we entered the trade deal with the UK, when our children's parties changed. Because in that deal, we give you oil and gas, and you give us everything we need for our children's parties, which is Durex, Jaguar, and wagon wheels. You know, we were very happy about entering the deal, by the way, because we're getting 3 for 2, you know. And I would have this really bad reaction to this bad vodka. I would drink it with others, of course. I needed to maintain my social status as a 12-year-old. But I would throw up at every party. Then they would give me less vodka. But I would still throw up at every party. And they stopped admitting me to the parties. But I would still come, and I would throw up as a sort of a dirty protest. So to put it in your context, in Russia, in the 90s, I would go to the parties with exactly the same agenda as around the same time in the UK, Kate Moss did in her anorexic prime. So, you know, it was a time. When I felt like, you know, like we had this, you know, we worked together, you know, with my father, with other people, with the outside world. And I just wish that feeling could come back to me one day, really. I mean, not the time, obviously. It was a fucking shitty time, to be honest. It was. The feeling, you know, one projection of one childish imagination based on some arbitrary and subjective personal experiences, you know. As are most of the things that I talked about today, really, you know. They seem to spawn real-life violence and hostility well enough. You know, if only it worked with the good stuff, right? Well, anyway, I'm just a comedian. I don't have the answers. I'm an idiot. I don't know anything. You know. What can I do? You know, sort of cross-cultural understanding thing. Like, all right, I wrote a joke recently, like a traditional British pun, a sort of a wordplay thing that you have, right? It's not very funny, but it's traditional. And in Russia, we cherish tradition because we can't think of any other way to feel good about ourselves. You know. So it goes like this. I believe
that if you do something good for somebody else, the universe will reward you. I was reading a story about a German beer producer in Nazi Germany who was saving Jews by giving them jobs. Risking his life, he saved about 200 Jews, and coincidentally, his beer production rose 200%. And I thought, oh, what an incredible act of brewery. Stupid. Anyway, I'm just a comedian. I don't know the answers, any answer. I'm just here, I don't know. Just trying to make a noise. You know. Basically, any noise that can be heard, to be honest. You know. I'm just here, I don't know, blowing a trumpet. Or if you will, cutting the cheese. Thank you very much. It's been amazing. Thank you. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, guys. Thank you.